The Sikha we will be learning is in Likutei Sichos Chelik Chavtes, the first Sikha to Parshas Re'ei. In Parshas Re'ei, there talks about the Beis Hamikdash. So we're going to learn about a Rambam that talks about the general structure of the Beis Hamikdash. In Hilchas Beis Abchira, Zog the Rambam, the Rebbe starts off by saying that in Hilchas Beis Abchira, which are the laws of the Beis Hamikdash, of the building and the details of the Beis Hamikdash. So the Rambam calls it Beis Abchira. So there the Rambam says like this. Hamikdash kulei lehoya b'misher ela b'may lahar. The entire building structure of the campus, so to speak, complex of the Beis Hamikdash was not built on a flat ground, but rather it was built on the incline of the mountain of Harameria, the Harabayis we call it. So it was built on the incline of the mountain because the mountain goes up. So the Beis Hamikdash is built on that incline of the mountain. Weiter is a mamshech the proti achilukim ve'aliyos. Now the Rambam continues the detailed differences and going up of the different sections. And this is what the Rambam says. When a person entered from the eastern gate of the Harabayis of this mountain, he would go till the end of the area called Chel, and it was flat ground. So he entered the gate, went on flat ground, till he came to the end of the area called Chel. Then he would go up on 12 steps to the next section, which was called Ezras Hanoshim. It's called Ezras Hanoshim for the women because women were allowed to go there, but that was another section. So from the first section, he walked straight, he went up 12 steps, and then he would have another area straight, which was the Ezras Hanoshim. So he went 12 steps up from the area of the Chel till the Ezras Noshim. And he would go on the whole Ezras Noshim, he would go straight. Again, he would go straight, even. And then from there, he would go up again to the Ezras Yisrael, which is Tchilas Azorah, which is the beginning of the regular area called Azorah. And there would be Chomesh Esra Mailas. He would go with 15 steps. And then Mahalach called Ezras Yisrael B'Shova, that area called Ezras Yisrael, he would again go on flat ground. And from there, he would go up one step and go up to the next section, which was called Ezras HaKeyanim. And then Mahalach called Ezras HaKeyanim HaMizbeach, then he would go on the straight area of the whole Ezras HaKeyanim and the area of the Mizbeach. From there, he would go to the next section called the Ulam, which is the beginning of the building, and to get to that, he would have to go up 12 steps. And the Ulam, and then when he would enter into the building, so the Ulam, which is the first area of the building, and then the Heichol, and then the Kedesh HaKadoshim, all that was flat again. So first he went area flat, he went up some steps, then he went up to the next area flat, again walked flat, and then he went up some steps, he went another area, then he went more, until he went up and he walked straight. On the area of the Heichel, he walked straight. So the Rambam started by saying that it wasn't on flat ground, but it was on the inclination of the mountain. So the Rebbe explains, this is the Rambam starts off by adding something which he really didn't seem to have to. He starts off by saying, Hamikdash kula lehoye b'misher. The Mikdash, the whole complex of the Mikdash was not all on straight, even ground. Elamai lahor, and said, but it was on the inclination of the mountain. Why did he have to start off by saying it wasn't on flat ground? He could have said not what it's not. He could have said just the positive, what it is. Should have started by saying, Hamikdash kula hoy b'may lahar. The Beis Hamikdash, the whole Beis Hamikdash, the whole complex was on the inclination of the mountain. Why does he have to start off by saying, and it was not on flat ground? So the Rebbe says, Yeshleimi, you can say the pshat, why the Rambam does it is like this. Since the Rambam holds that the fulfillment of the mitzvah of making the Beis Hamikdash comes from the pasuk, V'osu li Mikdash. The Eibusha told Moshe Rabbeinu in the desert, make for me a Mikdash, V'shachanti b'seicham, I'll dwell, I'll rest in the Mikdash. And that was the commandment for the Mishkan. And that same commandment also applies later to make the Beis Hamikdash. So the Rambam holds that to do the mitzvah of making a Beis Hamikdash is a continuation, the same mitzvah, continuation of the mitzvah of making the Mishkan in the desert. The Rambam says that in the beginning of Beis Abchira. Und wie teigt sich auf dort bei den Dvorim Shebibinyan Abayis, the Rambam even describes, when it comes to the general structure of the Beis Hamikdash, you see he uses the term which shows that it's going to be similar to the Mishkan because it's a continuation of the Mishkan. What does the Rambam say? He says like this, these are the things which are very important and the most important things when it comes to the structure of the building. Not of the building itself, but the whole area. You have to make a list. You have to make a building, it says, that has an area called Kodesh, which is also called the Heichel. It's the place where you had the Menorah and the Shulchan, the small Mizbeach. Then you make a Kodesh HaKadoshim, another area, Kodesh HaKadoshim, where the Oren stood. And the Rambam at and before the Kodesh, there was another chamber, another room in that building, which was called Ulam. And Shloshtam Nikla Heichel, and they're all called Heichel. And then around the Heichel, around this building, they would make like a mechitza, a fence, around it, far away from it, which means it left over empty ground between the building and the wall at the other side. And he says, why did they do that? This is similar to the kloyim, to the curtains that was in the yard of the Mishkan, was the same thing. Whatever is surrounded by this mechitza, which is similar to the yard of the Eyal Meid, which is the Mishkan, that's called Azora. And all this is called Mikdash. What do we see from here? That he compares the way it was structured by the Beis Hamikdash similar to the Mishkan. It's all because the Rambam holds that the Beis Hamikdash and the Mishkan have something in common. It's one hemshech to the other. But some Pashat L'Sheni is moving from the simple words means adidvorim seinen Iker bebinyan abai seinen ke'enu bedeimet to them was is given in Mishkan. That whatever is very important, the main things that's in the structure of this Beis Hamikdash, the building of the Bayis, the Beis Hamikdash, it's similar to the way it was in the Mishkan. Later on, Hilchot Beis Abchira says the gab something else. The gab the Sholish Machnav Zayin Gevem Midbar. There was in the desert. There were 3 camps, and there were different dinim who could enter into which camp. As connect on Laderis. So Rambam says Laderis, all later generations, when Yidden were already in Eretz Yisrael and Yerushalayim, there were areas similar to those 3. So all this shows that the building of the Beis Hamikdash is generally, not in every detail, generally similar to the way it was in the Mishkan. So we could have thought, ask Hashem with the ganze Mishkan is bepasht when I think like just like the Mishkan. Every area of the Mishkan, the whole Mishkan, very simple, was on a straight surface, which means a flat surface. Not one part was higher than the other. So we would assume the same thing would have happened in the Mikdash. That's what the Rambam starts off by saying, that the Mikdash was not all flat ground, wie der Mishkan, like a Mishkan. But it was on the inclination of the mountain. So the reason he starts off, because he wants to tell you clearly that it wasn't. Because we would have thought it should have been because it was similar to the Mishkan. So that explains why the Rambam starts off to tell us that it wasn't on flat ground, to tell us that it's different than the Mishkan. But then the Rebbe says the Rambam the Sefer from halachas, the Rambam Sefer that writes halachas, posha the laws, not a story, the place that tells us stories or facts that happened. It's halachas. He's moving, so we have to understand. So we must say, those for the Rambam is matayra the mikdash kulohoi b'mishar b'mayla. That this that the Rambam describes it, saying that the Beis Hamikdash was not on flat ground, but it was in the inclination of the mountain. Is need place that far is given the tzuras abayis b'peil. Not only because that's actually how it was, because it was that way, but it couldn't be that this is the reason that Rambam writes it, because it's a fact that that's how it was. You would think that that's the fact. And why was it a fact like that? Fact like that was because since the Mikdash was built on the mountain, of a har on the mountain, the Rambam goes always on an inclination. A mountain goes that way. So there was no choice. They had to build sections higher, going higher and higher, because that's the nature of the mountain. So But you can't say that that's the reason the Rambam writes it because it had to be that way. So physically, it was that way. It's not so. The dos anina shel halacha. It must be a halacha that it has to be that way. In Mikdash Kula, it's halacha in the Mikdash that the Mikdash must be that way. And the halacha is in Beide Protim from Shlil and Chiyav, and that's in both sides, in the what it's not, in the what it is. The Mikdash Kula, the Rambam is telling us a halacha that the Mikdash, the whole Mikdash, number one, Darf Zayin need b'misher, le'oy b'misher, tells you there's a halacha that has to be not flat, not because it just happened to be not flat because it's a mountain. It has halacha, it can be flat. And the second thing, Ella, but what is it? A Darf Zayin has to go on the mountain. So it can be flat, that's a halacha. And in Orah 8, the Rebbe says that Bechlal, even what we said before, that could be, we would think that the Rambam is saying it because that's the fact, that had to be that way. But it's on a mountain. He says it's not so simple. Even on a mountain, it could have been flattened out. Just like we said, there were sections. In one section, you walked flat, then you walked up a few steps, and there was a flat again. You walked up. Those sections that were flat in the middle between the steps also were on a mountain. Elamai, they made it, they flattened it out to make that section straight. So they could have done the whole thing, but the whole Beis Hamikdash. That Take on this mountain, but a certain area they would flatten out and would be flat. So the Rebbe says here in Orah 8 that it's not mamash acher gomer. You can't even say that it had to be that way because there's no other way, there's no choice. It's not so. So it must be that this that the Rambam says it was not flat is a halacha, and the fact that it was on going up steps, different sections going up steps, is also part of the halacha. You say them, you could say even what the Rebbe says. From there was the Rambam is medayik to sagen beloshen le'yalos. The Rambam says it in aloshen. It was not flat, but it was going in inclination of the mountain. Unitas in Mikdash kulo hemamayil harvele b'misha. The Rambam could have said it the same idea to say both sides. He could have said it much shorter. He could have said the Mikdash kulo hoya b'mayil harvele b'misha. The Mikdash, the whole Beis Hamikdash was on the inclination of the mountain and not on flat ground. He didn't have to start off, it was not on flat ground, but straight. So that seems to be saying something deeper. It is mashmer from that, it seems like it's not order 12 there brings a Tosfos, it seems that way. Ados is nita ninyan nor lechatchile nor at likuve. That this is it cannot be on a flat ground and then has to go higher levels is something that must be. Sometimes there are things lechatchile. That's how you have to do it. But if it's not done that way, b'diavad it's also kosher. But when the Rambam writes it was not but this way, is mashma that even b'diavad would be possible. Let's say they would have some reason, whatever, make the Beis Hamikdash flat. So be Beis Hamikdash possible. It wouldn't be kosher. Even b'diavad. That's how it's mashma. That's how important it was that it should not be flat and it should be going higher. What's the pshat? We have to understand. That the binyan hamikdash is a hemshich from mitzvahs v'asur hamikdash, since the making the building of the Beis Hamikdash is a continuation of v'asur hamikdash. Was kiyuma tzachon gefangen mit Mishkan, which the fulfillment of this mitzvah started with the Mishkan, and the Beis Hamikdash continues what happened to the Mishkan. Und die Dvorim shenika b'binyan haba is eine bedugma to the Dvorim shemishkan kanal, and the things that are important in the building of the structure of the campus of the Beis Hamikdash is similar to the way it was in the Mishkan. Was in the Asbore, was in them Indian darf them Mikdash ein anders from the Mishkan. What's the explanation? Why in this prat, in this detail, the Mikdash has to be different? And the order 14, the Rebbe says that it's not a kasha. Why? Why we know? Because everything that was done in the Mikdash came from Hashem. There's a posuk that says Hakel biksav miyad Hashem alai hisken. Everything was written from Hashem. Now, exactly what it means, how it was it given to Moshe, was it given directly to David? But it came from Hashem, and that described exactly how the structure has to be. So it's not a kasha, why was it that way? Because that's what Hashem gave it. That's what the Rebbe says. What's the hasbore? You could say there is no reason for it. Okay, we have no kashas. It's a gzeras hakosav, the Ibisha said so. But if we're able to give an explanation, we should try to give an explanation. So the Rebbe is asking here, what's the explanation why it had to be not flat, and it had to be b'dafke going from level to level. So the Rebbe says like this. Now, from the Mishkan, and even though we do see there were quite a few things that the Mikdash was different than the Mishkan. On the from Midas HaMikdash, starting from the measurements of the size, making protein beguf binyan details in the actual building. There are plenty of things different in the Beis Hamikdash and the Mishkan. So number one, when we'll discuss those things, we'll need a reason there too. What was the reason? To try to give a reason why that has to happen. The second thing, this is even more. The Kama Mehem is a Tam Poshut. Some of the different things that we find in the Mikdash over the Mishkan, there's a simple reason why. Come for instance, the Mikdash is given Eich Ma'avodim Kiyetzeh. The Beis Hamikdash made of stones. Stones was part of it too. Also, Asar Gresser and Hechem Mishkan. It was bigger, higher, taller, higher than the Mishkan. There's a very simple reason. The Baltas are given the data since Zelbun Nordkids, but since it was supposed to last for many generations, and in the same place, so they had to make it stronger. So they had to make it bigger. They had to make it from stones. So it's a logical reason. The Mishkan was only a temporary thing for a certain short time. So that didn't have to be so strong. So it could have been made of wood. It doesn't have to be from stones. It didn't have to be so strong. And this is a logical reason why it is. So number one, this is different than others because, first of all, it's not even different. The other things also need a beer. But even if not, this needs more beer because this, other things of the difference between the Mikdash and the Mishkan is understood up Yiseichel. But here, what's the reason why this can't be like the Mishkan? That the Mishkan was flat and this should not be flat. And the third thing, another thing, here not only it was different, we make a special effort, a special dogash, a special stress to tell us that it was not flat. So it's not stam, it's just when you compare the two, you see this was different. Here we make a fuss over saying, it was not like the Mishkan. It was, Mishkan was flat, this was not. And this was steps and it went from level to level. So here we're making a fuss over it. So here definitely would make more sense that we need to find an explanation why it was that way. The Leib Rabbi was at the Rebbe, the Pshat could be like this. The difference in the place that was in the Mikdash on this inclination of the mountain, that there were different levels, but the Hiluch von ein Chelik zum Zweiten gewähnt bei Eifen shel Ali b'mayis. And therefore, to go from one section to another, you have to go up steps. Seine Behesem, the meat was jeder für sie hat in sich Teisves. And Ali b'gdusha look up at the Mokim Farem. Fits, because every one of these areas that you had to go up steps to go to the next area is because each area was higher, had more of Kedusha compared to the lower place. The Rambam explains later that each one of these areas is holier than the one before. So what the Rebbe is basically saying is that the reason why it went up higher from one level to another physically is because in Kedusha they were higher. These levels were higher. So the Rebbe says that's why you could say as the din from Hamikdash kula lohei b'mishel b'mayla hadis that we say the Beis Hamikdash, the whole Beis Hamikdash was not on flat land, but it was on the inclination of the mountain, is verbunden mit der Aliyas hadargische b'kedushas Hamikdash. It's connected to the going higher in the levels of holiness in the Mikdash. Every place that's higher physically is because it has a higher level of kedusha. So that's why it had to be. When the fathers is adin nori Mikdash and mishkan, and therefore this idea that it had to go from level to level is a din only in the Beis Hamikdash, not in the Mishkan. This, that because there is higher levels in Kedusha, makes a change in the physical area, each area has to be physically higher, is something, is verbunden mit Getter HaKedusha, was ist nischadisch geworden, in Mikdash, l'gab HaKedusha Mishkan. That's something that only happened by the Beis Hamikdash, not in the Mishkan. They didn't explain yet how, but what he's trying to say is, since we just said that the Gashmis, there were different levels, and you had to go up steps, is because each one of these levels was higher level in Kedusha. That concept that the higher level in Kedusha affected that physically it should be also a higher level is only shaykh to the Beis Hamikdash, not to the Mishkan. Why? He has brought in them, so the explanation that Rebbe says like this. There's a big difference between the Mishkan and the Beis Hamikdash. The Mishkan is going to be binyan aray. The Mishkan was a temporary structure. Mishakos of the Pasuk says, Mishkan, I'm going in a tent in a Mishkan, like a tent. A tent is a temporary dwelling. As the Rambam said, as we mentioned before, he said that the first fulfillment of the mitzvah of Osel Mikdash was the Mishkan, and the Mishkan, Beisha Meit, was only Lefisha, only for a time being, it was only temporary. The Beis Hamikdash was already a permanent dwelling place for Hashem. Like the Rambam says, Nivna Mikdash b'Yerushalayim. As soon as the Mikdash was built in Yerushalayim, Nasru Kola Mekem Eskulum Livnis Behem Bais Lashem. All other places was forbidden to build there a house to Hashem or Hakev ben Korban, to bring any Korban. And there's no house able to be built anywhere for all generations, only in Yerushalayim, Yerushalayim alone, and only on this mountain called the Har HaMiriya. So we see the difference. The Mishkan was a temporary dwelling, and the Beis Hamikdash was already permanent. That's Hashem's place, and that's it. And therefore, the difference between the two in describing the concept of the Kedusha that comes into the place, into the Mishkan and the Mikdash, it'll be a difference. The Mishkan is the Chaleis HaKedusha given Bikin in the Binyan Mechalokov. By the Mishkan, when we say it was a temporary place, so the Kedusha that came in only came upon the building, the structure, and all the different parts of the structure. The Kroshim, the walls of the Mishkan, which are made of cedar wood, Yerias, the curtains, they were anointed with the Shem and the Mishkan, with a special oil that they anointed the Mishkan, but that was the building, the structure, and that was steady. In other words, the walls were the same walls always. It took almost 40 years in the Midbar, and they traveled from place to place. They put up the Mishkan in different places, the same walls, the same Yerias, all the same. So the Kedusha was there in the Eifon Kavu in a set way. In Zay is need given Kashinun. In them, there was no change. So it's only in the building itself there was no change. But as the Rebbe is going to say, but there was a change in the floor. The Mishkan didn't stay in the same floor. In Beis Hamikdash, is given Dushas Mokim. In Beis Hamikdash, it was only that not only that the structure of the building or the walls and things like that was holy, but the ground, the place where it stood, had Kedusha. That Kedusha is Mokim. In order 22, the Rebbe quotes from the Marsha, Lehoya la Mishkan shum kviyas mokim. By the Mishkan, there was no kviyas mokim. There was a kviyas in the walls that it stood for a while. But the mokim, the place where it stood on, had no kedusha, and you didn't have to do anything to make it holy. Had the pshat that every time they came to a place, they traveled and they stopped and they put up the Mishkan, that they had to be mekadosh again, bring holiness, do something to bring holiness into the floor, because the floor did not become holy. That etzem mokem hamikdash is kaddish, but by the Beis Hamikdash it's not like that. By the Beis Hamikdash, when they built the Beis Hamikdash, the floor, the place where the building stood on, and the whole area, the whole campus of the Beis Hamikdash stood on, was holy. Und in zwei Sachen, and you see two things concerning the Beis Hamikdash. Number one, Dafke b'negei Beis Hamikdash zoknu b'pashasei na mokem asher yifrach Hashem elokechem bei. In this Parshas Eikev, the Pasuk says that there'll be the place which Hashem will choose it. What does it mean? The place, so the place becomes holy. A second thing is given the Ma'aseh HaKiddush from Karka Ritzvah HaMikdash. They were Mekadosh HaMikdash, the Mekadosh the floor. When Shlomo HaMelech was Mekadosh, he did whatever you had to do up Yalocha to be Mekadosh, to bring the Shechina, the Kedusha into. He was Mekadosh the floor also. So Hashem chose the floor, and then there was a Kedusha that was put in the floor. So we see here the difference between the Mishkan and the Mikdash. The Mishkan, because it was temporary, the floor, the place where it's standing out did not become holy. The Beis Hamikdash, the floor was also holy. But now, the Mishkan steht in Posik by a Seite, in Offer Ashayir Bekarka the Mishkan Yikach HaKayan. Even though in the Mishkan that says when you bring a Seite, a woman who did something that the husband said she shouldn't do, and you bring her to the Beis Hamikdash, and you have to give her to drink the water. So you have the water, and it says you should take the sand of the floor of the Mishkan and put it into the water, give it to drink. So we do see there is something special in the floor of the Mishkan. So the Rebbe says it's not the same thing as he's not given or aray lefisho. First of all, it was only a temporary thing. That itself, when the Mishkan stood here, you took it from this place, from this floor. When you move, that floor is not holy anymore. You come to another place, so that floor. So it's also, even the floor is not kavua. Besides that, I feel a be'esesho. Even the moment when it was standing in one place, and they took the sand of that floor, he says, "Geven nitzulib the kedusha from the mokim the karka." It wasn't because the floor had its own kedusha, because the floor is holy, so the sand from that floor is holy. No, the Yerias v'kroshim hamishkan v'ches gestanden of the karka. It was because there was the walls and the Mishkan stood on this place, that's why you should take it from the Karka. So the specialty of the sand of the floor of the Mishkan was not because the floor was special, because it was the floor of the Mishkan that was standing over it. But the floor itself by the Mishkan did not have a Kedusha. High time is the Achilik between Mokan and Mishkan and Mokan and Mikdash. That makes a difference between the place of the Mishkan and the place of the Beis Hamikdash. By Mishkan, by the Mishkan, after they took it apart, and they traveled as they did many Masoyas in the desert. They took it apart and they traveled. There was no holiness left in the original first place that it stood before. Just like it said by Har Sinai was holy. By Matan Torah, David sits around the mountain is holy, no one should go up. But then it says, when you hear the shofar blowing, you could go up. Why? That's a siman for Silu Shechina. That's a Silu Shechina. That's a siman that the Shechina left. So after the Shechina left, the Kedusha did not stay because the Kedusha did not penetrate into the floor. Basically, the floor did not be'etzem become holy. It only became holy because of what's standing on it. So the Mishkan was on, like by the Hasina, the Mishkan came on it, so it became holy. Shem came by Beis Hamikdash, but the Beis Hamikdash is the din with the Rambam passing. By Beis Hamikdash, the din is like the Rambam says, as makriv and akarbonis kulam after pishen shom bais bonoi. You could bring all the karbonis even if you don't have the house. And you could eat kotche kadoshim, certain karbonis that you have to eat in the Azora. So even if the house is even if it's destroyed, it doesn't have the wall around it, but the place itself is holy, you could eat the karbonis there. Since the place itself became holy, why? The Shechina, because the Shechina is there, but the Shechina made it so that it Hashem chose the place he chose. The Bchira is in the Mokim, the choice of Hashem is in the place. It's not only he chose the Mishkan, and this happened to be the Mikdash, and this happened to be the place at the Mikdash, so this is the place where the Mikdash stand. That's holy. No, he chose the Mokim itself. The Rebbe bleibt at Kedusha Leilavoh. That's why the Kedusha stays forever. And the Rebbe says, the reason why the place became holy because of the Shechina, and this is what the Rambam says, that the place of the Mikdash became holy, the Rambam says, is because of the Shechina. That means here the Shechina entered into the place. By the Mishkan, it's also because the Shechina was there, but they didn't make the floor holy because the Shechina came there, and B'meila, this is the place on which the Shechina is resting. The Mishkan is resting on. But here, the Shechina chose the place, so the Shechina entered into the place, so the place became holy. So that's a difference in the Mishkan and the Mikdash. That explains why by the Beis Hamikdash was this something new, something different, that the whole Mikdash was not flat, it was on the inclination of the mountain. And that's why we'll explain there was different in the levels in the Beis Hamikdash between one place and the other. So it was Bedavke not flat, and Bedavke there had to go up steps to different places because, and in the Mishkan not, and we'll explain why based on what we just said before. Davke Mikdash was his doag dusha b'shaychet zemokem gufe, because in the Mikdash, in the Beis Hamikdash, the place was holy. So the holiness is not only in the Beis Hamikdash, which is only in the floor, also on the floor, in the Mokim. Their Mokim is a Mokim asher yivcher Hashem. It's a place where Hashem chose. Dort ishayich zog na di chiluki ha'kedusha imigdash shafen chiluki b'mokim mikdash. There, in the Mikdash, you could say that the physical place fits according to the different levels of kedusha. In Geva Hashetach von the Mikemis, in the height of the area of each place, mitvas ein mokim zuskitet von zweite mokim. That one place is different. In other words, we're saying the different reason why it was not flat and it had to be different heights because of the spiritual level. That's why the floor had to be higher in this place and the floor had to be higher in this place, not all the same, is because the Kedusha in the Mikdash affected the Mokim. So the physical Mokim, the physical place, had to fit to the Kedusha because the Kedusha went to the physical place. So every physical place which had a different level of Kedusha had to be a different level. From the Kedusha's Mokim from Beis Hamikdash is not like Kedusha Klolis. It's not the holiness of the Mokim of the Beis Hamikdash is not only a general holiness, gleich in dem ganzen Beis Hamikdash, equal in the whole Beis Hamikdash. Nur is eine doch Luke Dargis in Dushas Amokim, behesem to Dargis Agdusha from the Chelki Abayis. Heichel Vazora. We said before that the Gdusha of the Beis Hamikdash penetrated into the Mokim. The Mokim became holy, but not only the Mokim became holy in the general idea that this is part of the Beis Hamikdash. It became holy in a certain level, in a certain detailed level. And since the place represented the Kedusha of that level, physically, the place had to be a different level. So therefore, there had to be levels in the physical place. And the truth is that this Kedusha that we said now, specific levels of Kedusha went into the specific places, physical places, is also forever. Even if the Beis Hamikdash is not built anymore, the Kedusha of each level remains. The verstandig ich from the Rambam Anal, we see it from the Rambam that we said before, as Eichel Kodesh Kadoshim B'chol Azora Afik B'Shechareva. Even the Beis Hamikdash is destroyed, you could eat Kodesh Kadoshim in the whole Azora, which means the Kedusha of what the Azora represents, which is a higher Kedusha than the lower part, remains even if the Beis Hamikdash is not there. That means that this is forever. The Kedusha in the Mokim is forever. Not only the general Kedusha, that it's a holy place because it's a place of the Beis Hamikdash, and that's the Mokim HaMikdash, but the detailed Kedusha is there forever. Because Achilas Kodesh Kadoshim became a Bazara. Kodesh Kadoshim you could only eat in the Azara. And the Rambam says that even if it's destroyed the Beis Hamikdash, you could still eat it there because it still has the Kedusha of the Azara. So every place in the Beis Hamikdash, the place Gashmi, the physical place, got a certain specific level of Kedusha. Hashenka the Mishkan was is not given in the Meifen from Kviyas Bavakim. The Mishkan, we said before, the Kedusha did not penetrate, did not get established in the physical place. She's need given a mokim Hashem Hashem. Wasn't the place that Hashem chose. The Kedusha of Mishkan is given the Chelkei Elmeid, Kroshim V'Yiriyas. The Kedusha of the Mishkan was only in the built structure, in the walls, in the Yiriyas, the curtain that were on top, and all these places, but not the floor. The Rebbe is by Mishkan nicht given, nicht nimshech und nicht geworden der Unterschied von Kedushas Chelkei Mishkan in der Mokim b'Midbar, which is given Aroyis Chanis Mishkan. And therefore, there it wasn't different sections in different heights, begashmias, according to the levels of Kedusha, because there were different levels of Kedusha in the Mishkan too, but that had nothing to do with the place. The place didn't get the Kedusha, so it didn't have to express itself in the place. On the other hand, in the Beis Hamikdash, since the Kedusha of the Beis Hamikdash, including the different levels of Kedusha in the Beis Hamikdash, penetrated into the place. So the physical place had to fit according to the different levels of Kedusha. When the Fari the Mokim HaMishkan given b'Mishkan, that's why in the place of the Mishkan it was flat. In Shetach HaMishkan Gufa is ein Mokim for Chelek HaMishkan nie given who's getil from that zweite Mokim. In the Mishkan, one place of the Mishkan was not different than the other place of the Mishkan. The floor was the same floor, the same level of the Yalmeid and the V'Kedesh HaKadoshim and the Azora, because the place had nothing to do, was not connected to having its Kedusha of its level. But in the Beis Hamikdash, since the Kedusha of the Beis Hamikdash and the detailed levels of Kedusha in Beis Hamikdash penetrated into the place, so the place physically had to be different. When the Fari the Rambam Madish dem chilek zwischen Mishkan and Mikdash. That's why the Rambam tells us, as the question was, why does he stress that it's not flat which means like the Mishkan? And he makes a fuss over it to tell you that there's some inyan in it. So he says, now we know there were other differences also, but he doesn't stress the difference. When we start comparing, we see it, but why does he stress the difference here? There are many differences. And the Rambam doesn't point out this is different than the Mishkan, this is different than the Mishkan. And here he does. Only this idea, this concept, that the Mikdash was not flat, but it was an inclination of the mountain, which means the Cheluki Aliyas from the Chelkei Mishkan, the different levels of the parts of the Mikdash, from the Mikdash, that shows a very important difference in what the Mikdash was and what the Mishkan was. Because this is a Mokim Hashiyivcha Hashem, Hashem chose the place, but made the place holy, and therefore here the place had to fit the holiness. While in the Mishkan, the place didn't become holy. It was just the place where the Mishkan stood, but the place on its own didn't become holy. So the whole level of all the floor of under all the levels is the same. So that was flat. And the Rama makes a point of it because that's a very important point when it comes to understand the difference in the Mishkan and the Mikdash. But according to the Rebbe says, we have to understand. Based on what we said before, the different levels in the space of the Mikdash is connected to the different levels, higher or lower levels in the kedusha of the place. What hecher is given the kedusha from chelik hamikdash als hecher given sein shetach mokim, that the higher the level of kedusha was in the place, in this place of the mikdash, it was higher physically in the space, in the physical space. So if that's so, that because there's a higher level of kedusha in the mikdash, it had to be in a higher space physically. So why were there no steps going to the Kedesh HaKadoshim? We learned that the building was all flat. And they had three sections there, the Ulam, the Heichol, and the Kedesh HaKadoshim. Now, definitely the Kedesh HaKadoshim was much higher than the Heichol in Kedusha. So I wouldn't have to go up. If we're saying in the Mikdash, the steps represent the higher level of Kedusha. The Kedesh HaKadoshim, doch given Kishmei, Kedesh HaKadoshim. The Kedesh HaKadoshim was, what's called Kedesh HaKadoshim? The Holy of Holies. That means within, amongst holiness, it was the holiest. It was the different in the level of Gedusha from all other parts of the building. With the Rambam Firtuis invited in Perik, the Rambam says in the later Perik, at the Hechse Gedusha is in the base Kedesh HaKadoshim. That the highest level of Gedusha is in this room called Kedesh HaKadoshim. Shei nichs no shem alakein Godel b'yim kippurim b'shas aveda. That only the Kein Godel and only on Yom Kippur while he's doing David is allowed to enter. So this is a level that's much higher than the level before. So it should have been higher, not only higher than the other. It should be much higher because the level of Kedusha was much higher. And we said in the Mikdash, the physical levels of Kedusha, of the physical place, had to fit according to the levels of Kedusha. So why was there no steps? Should have been a lot of steps to going up to Kedesh HaKadoshim. In the Hefresh, we'll understand this by first explaining what we said before in the difference between the Mishkan and the Mikdash. What we said before, the difference, this was temporary, as the Mishkan and the Beis Hamikdash was permanent, etc. We said the difference was whether it was the Mokim that was holy or not. All that, the Rebbe is going to explain later in Signet from Teres Achsidus. Before it was more or less in Nigla. It's halachadik thing. The Kedusha, which is a halachadik idea, where's the Kedusha? Did it go into the Mokim or not? Now I'll explain this according to Chassidus. And now, after we explain that, we'll see why by enter to the Kedesh HaKadoshim, he didn't have to go the steps. It explains like this. The Mishkan was given at the Mishkan, which was a temporary dwelling, so to speak, to Hashem. Given Gebuit, we see, was built from Eitzim. It was built from wood, kroshim, tzameach, wood. Wood is tzameach. You know, we have 4 categories in the world. Daimon tzameach, chaim medaber. Daimon tzameach, things that can't move, that have no life. Then you have the plant life, and then you have animal life, and then you have a human being. So mainly, most part of the Mishkan was made of eitzim, which is semeach, things that grow. Yeriyas, then you had the yeriyas, which were the cover. The yeriyas came in the side of the Mishkan. Teilweise gemacht von Chai, was part of Chai. Now Chai is a higher level. The animal life is a higher level than the plant life. Like I said, there's daimim is the lowest, like stones, things, rocks, that's called daimim. Then higher than that is tzeveach, things that grow, plant life, and then there's animal life. Here it worked like this. The top, the main part was the wood. The wood is tzemeach. Then you had the yeriyas, which is made of chai. Blazer, karka, l'fisho making given is given daimim offer. The floor on which temporary you put up the structure, that was daimim, that was sand, that was the floor. So here we see it was tzemeach and chai. Which was a permanent dwelling place to Hashem. It was made mainly stones. You're not allowed to build any wood that you could see, that you could stick out, or stones or bricks, rocks or bricks. But that was, and that's daimon. Which is lower than the category of the plant life and the living life. So we see in the Mishkan, we didn't have any things which was made of daimon. The floor, but the floor was, as we said before, not part of the Mishkan. And Chassidus explains what's the reason why the Mishkan was made with Tzemeach and Chai, and the Beis Hamikdash was made mainly of daimon. So the reason is given in Yonesh Mishkan is given it as a feel of Sepels and Ashinu Kavu in Gashmi Seilam. The purpose of the Mishkan was not so much to bring about a change, an established permanent change in the physicality of the world. Mainly it was to be a reflection of the Hishtalshalas. We know in Chassidus we learn about Seder Hishtalshalas. Everything starts from the Eibishter, Eir Ein Sof. And from Eir Ein Sof goes to certain lower levels. The Eir gets lower, and there it gets lower, there it gets lower, to finally it comes onto this world. So the Mishkan was supposed to be, in this physical world, a reflection of the way they say the Ishtalshalas of Eir Sof is in order 42 that ever been to Rabbi Bachai in different places from the Ramah where it talks about this. That was the purpose of the Mishkan. Und the Rebbe is der Binyan HaMishkan gewähnt beheste with the Inyan and Nimshach Seder Ishtalshalas. That's why the Mishkan was made fitting to the way the Seder Ishtalshalas of Eir Sof coming down. The Michsa HaMishkan Lamayle gewähnt for Chai, the top part, which was the cover of the Mishkan, which is Yerias, was made of Chai, which is the highest of the three. There's Chai and Sameach and Daimim. The Seder Ishtalshalas goes that there's a higher level, higher. Then it goes down lower, lower level. Then it goes lower and lower. So the Mishkan was made that way. The highest level was Chai. Azeyach, the Yerias Izim Shalamatam, there was also lower than that. There was Yerias Izim, Yerias made of hair growing on goats, which is also Chai, which is the animals. And the Yerias on top is also made from wool, things like that. Ubrubam the Yerias Shalamatam, and most of the Yerias lower than that. Lamatam is lower than that. Miyuta the Yerias Mishkan, or the Nider Kechalka Mishkan, Karsha Mishkan, then lower than that. Some of the Yerias and the lower part of the Mishkan and the walls of the Mishkan, which was under it, was made from Tzemeach. So Chai is higher, Tzemeach is lower. Lower than that were the sockets from the bottom of the Mishkan, which is made, when Kesef offered them Kesef, it is made from silver, and it was also, the floor of the Mishkan was in the bottom, that was Daimim. So the Mishkan was made in such a way that it came from higher to lower to lower. Why? Because as we said before, it's supposed to reflect the way the Shtalshalas of the Eir Sof goes down, so it goes from higher to lower. That Yisr and Nufta from Beis HaMikdash, the Mishkan is, what's so special, different about the Beis HaMikdash in this Inyan versus the Mishkan, is in them was durch im 40 the Kavonah von Yisava Kadosh Baruch Hu Lias Leidire B'Tachtenim. That the Mikdash was supposed to represent, was supposed to cause this, that the Eibishter wanted to have a dwelling place in Tachtenim, in the low worlds. In other words, it means as the Gdusha, the Asrosh, Ashchine, soll nimshich werden und durchnehmen die Welt. The Beis HaMikdash was supposed to cause that the Gdusha, which is the Shchine, should penetrate into the world, bis to the niedrigste Darge from Gashmi Selim, all the way into the lowest physicality of this world. Eichlem Suk von Daimon. Also the daimon, which is within the physical gashmistic world, this is the lowest. In welch lesetzich nit begilles an chayis and zayruchnis is the lowest level. You can't, in some, even in Sameach, you see some life. In Iraq, you don't see any life. It's the lowest. It's most gashmias. And what the Eibishter wanted with the Beis HaMikdash is that the Ein Sof should come all the way down. Und the Balda the Beis HaMikdash is in Yonik zum Abschluss an Ashros Ashchine in Welt. Since the purpose of the Beis HaMikdash was to bring down the dwelling of the Shechina in the world, in such a way that the Kedusha should penetrate into the world and elevate the Gashmis of the world. The That's why in the physical part of the Beis HaMikdash of the world, it was actually that way. At the Ort where the Beis HaMikdash gestanden is given Bahar, so number one, it was in a mountain. What's the Taicha? It was a mountain. The Beis HaMikdash is on a mountain. The mountain is an elevated place. So first of all, that's supposed to show that we're supposed to elevate the world. It's supposed to elevate around it. And in Order 44, the Rebbe says that the Gemara says, "Zvachim Beis HaMikdash geveyim kol Eretz Yisrael, Eretz Yisrael geveyim kol Arotz." Beis HaMikdash higher than Eretz Yisrael higher than everything else. That means it's the highest place, and this is a mountain in Yerushalayim. So this represents the idea: what is the purpose of the Mishkan? To take the Gashmias. That's what the mountain is. And it sticks, it gets higher, it's elevated. And the higher the aliyah was higher than them. So the mountain itself showed aliyah, and in that gufa there were higher places, higher levels. So it went from higher to lower, and it went all the way low. And then when you're going up into the mikdash, which means you're elevating the gashmis from the lowest place, different levels. You're going higher from one level to Kedusha and higher level to Kedusha, higher level to Kedusha. That was the concept of what we said before, that by the Mikdash, it penetrated into the Mokim. The Mokim is the physicality of it. By the Beis Hamikdash, the purpose was that the physicality should be affected and be elevated. And those are the different levels that we have in Kedusha, that when we walk there, we elevate it. But the Mishkan, which its main purpose was not that the Shechina that's there should penetrate the Gashmis of the world, even in the Daimim, the earth, which is the lowest. So as much as the Kedusha came down, and it came down here, but it didn't penetrate into it. It didn't become part of it. And therefore, it was there, but it remained removed, so to speak, a separate entity. That's what it means, that it didn't penetrate in the physical place, because the whole purpose of it was not to change the Gashmis. Its whole purpose was to show the Seder Ishtalshalis. But the Gashmis itself is not to be elevated. So the Gashmis, the place did not get affected, because the Beis Hamikdash, we said, since the whole purpose was to affect the place, that means to change the place. So the place had the Kedusha, and you had higher and lower, and you were supposed to elevate the lower one. Therefore, even though in the Mishkan also there were different levels in Kedusha, but in the place, you didn't see that difference in levels. It was all flat. It wasn't elevated each area according to the level of Kedusha, because the place, the floor didn't get the Kedusha. And it wasn't picked up. It wasn't even higher, even one level. It was on the floor of the midbar. So it was on the flat place of the midbar to show that the mokim here had nothing to do. By the Beis Hamikdash, we said, first of all, it was a mountain. The mountain itself represents it's going higher. Here it wasn't a mountain. It was the floor, and the floor stayed the floor. The Kedusha came, the Kedusha didn't penetrate the floor, so the floor remained the floor. So if it remained the floor, so every area in the Mishkan was the same, because the floor was not a mokim. That was, the idea was to elevate that place. So the place was not on a mountain, it was straight. The Beis Hamikdash should penetrate the floor, because the purpose was that the Gashmis should change. So the Gashmis changed. Like if you walked higher, you came to a higher level of the Gashmis, the Kemokim. So it had to be physically higher, because the spiritual level was higher. The Tamfa was the Kedesh HaKadosh HaMikdash. The Mokim HaMekudesh B'Yeser is Nigev Anus Ketil Begevit from the Meichel HaMikdash. This will give an explanation why the Kedesh HaKadosh HaMikdash, which is the holiest place there, was not different in height from the Heichel of the Mikdash. It was all, the building, the Heichel, was all flat. Why? And he explains it. Because the Inyan in as Kedusha Ruchnis for Mikdash, pale to that aliyah from Gashmis, about this idea we said, that the spiritual Kedusha of the Mikdash has an effect and elevates the Gashmis, the physical place, was the Faris Eimakim Hechafen Mitzvayten Ledi Chlukim in the Kedusha, and which is the reason, as we said before, why one place physically is higher than the other, because there's differences in the levels of Kedusha. This all is Shayach, but the Gei Azel Chamatregis in Kedusha, but the Nidirike Dargis Be'erech Terecheret. It's only when the lower one is lower than the higher one, but it's Be'erech. Be'erech means it's comparable. Like you say, 100 is more than one, but it's comparable. 100 is made up of 100 ones. So it's comparable. It's therefore Hecher Norbishtem Esramas gates. Like one place was higher. With how many steps? 12 steps. That shows 12 steps. I mean, it's like a higher, but it's not ve'inarech, not no comparison. It's higher, 12 steps. When we talk about the level of dusha, which is not compared to the other levels at all, bis to sein Hecher from together from Mailamat, at such a high level that is beyond the concept of higher or lower. It's complete different category altogether. By a darge nailis bein arech, when it's such a high level which has no erech, no comparison to the lower levels, is nichayach ados al zichusdik and not sol trep miles. It can't express itself in how many steps you're going to go. In geva modut ubukbel, in a limited height. Ubamela nitin geva mokum gashma. So you can't express it in a physical height. It'll be a little higher, it'll be more higher. It's still better. This is something that height, physical height, will not make a change. That's the difference in all other parts of the Beis Hamikdash and the Kedesh HaKadosh. Chelke HaMikdash is the Kedusha for Neinem Hecher. The other parts of the Mikdash, each level is higher, but be'erech. It's comparable. It has a comparison in the level that's so close to it. The higher level, it's compared to the higher. It's just a little bit lower. The higher one is a little bit higher than this one. And according to the difference in how much higher it is, that will make the change in how many steps there will be between. One is higher, one place higher than the other, according to how much the higher, whether it's higher in Ruchnius. Or by the Kedusha from Kedesh HaKadoshim, we talk about the Kedesh HaKadoshim, the holiness of the Kedesh HaKadoshim. But dort given Gilui ba'amokim. There, Take, we said before, the place became higher. So the place was changed. But from what? From Atzmus. It came from the level of the Eibishter himself. Nimna nimnois. And the Eibishter himself, we say he's beyond all limitations. And the word nimna nimnois means it's impossible. By him, it's impossible to say impossibilities. He could have two opposites too. In other words, place and not place is all the same. In the Mokim Oren, for instance, saying in the Kedesh HaKadoshim, which is the place of the Oren, Sheinim and Amida. The Oren itself was something like that. Oren took a place and didn't take a place at the same time. If you measured the size of the Oren, let's say in the length, you would measure it to be 2.5 amas long, and from one wall to wall was 10 amas in the Mishka, let's say. So from one end of the Oren to the other should have been not 10, it should have been 10 minus 2.5. So it should be 7.5. It wasn't like that. If you measured from one wall to the other, it was 10. If you measured one side of the Mishkan of the Oren to the other, was 5 and 5, and the Oren itself was 2.5. It made no sense. It took up place. It had to be 2.5. It had to be a certain measurement, and at the same time, didn't take a place. That is Leib klal to shar chalkei hamikdash. That was in the Kedesh HaKadoshim. That's the level of Kedesh HaKadoshim, which is beyond in any comparison to all other parts of the Mikdash. Hecher b'chlal from the Geder Mailamata, higher than the whole concept of higher and lower. Higher and lower is space. This is not in the category of space. Azah hecher kai kennet ausgedrückt werden. Afile beken remes v'dugme in ageva von amokem gashmash is model mumbo. Such a height you can't express in any type of space. Not even as a remes. Not even to show that it's higher. And you can't express it in a physical space because the physical space is limited. You could only express it in physicality in something that's higher than something else with a limitation. So in Gashmis, you limit it to 12 steps, whatever amount, but not this. So that's why by the Kedesh HaKadoshim, after we understand the idea of the Mikdash versus the Mishkan, al Pichsidis, then we understand why in the Beis HaMikdash, the Kedesh HaKadoshim did not have steps. No chayinyan in them, another thing. Another point that Rabbi wants to make. Look at what the Rambam says. The Rambam, when he gives the different areas, and he says you go here and this is higher, the Lashon uses when a person would enter the eastern gate of the Harabais, the mountain. Mahalach, he would go at Sof HaChel till the area of the end of the area called Chel, B'Shaveh, that would be flat. Then V'Eile, then he would go up, Min HaChel Eses HaNoshim B'Shnei Mesrad. He would go up from the area of Chel to the next area, Eses HaNoshim, with 12 steps. Then he says further, then he would walk in Eseshnoshim again, would be flat, then he goes up more steps. So what does Rambam do here? He doesn't talk about the space itself. He doesn't say this space is higher than that space with 12 steps. This is higher than that with this amount of steps. He's talking about a person going, how much do you have to go up? You have to go here 12 steps. You have to go here 12 steps. What's the reason for it? What's a strange thing? Why does the Rambam write that? He should have written this. The Heichel was higher than this steps, and as the Snoshim higher than this and this amount of steps. The Rambam is there. Mit Meramis. The Rambam wants to hint. All these levels is when a person goes from one level to another. He goes from level of dusha of one level to another level. He does beifun as eretzelas, muspils and ali bottom. When you go there, it has to cause you to go up. It's not that you're walking up. If the Rambam would say this is higher than that, doesn't mean that the person has to elevate himself. The place is higher. The Rambam wants to tell you that when you walk on it, it causes you to be uplifted. You're uplifted to higher madrege. When it comes to the level of Kedesh HaKadoshim, is neither Eifin Aderodim is Heilig Vela. There, the Rambam doesn't say you walk. The other places you walk and you elevate yourself. When it came to Kedesh HaKadoshim, it doesn't say that. steigt hecher in seine Aliyas bekedesh. He doesn't say he's going higher in these levels. That's not higher. Higher level means it's be'erech, but it's higher. Nor as kule bebitel b'mtzias lagamre, kule b'shav. It comes back to the Kedesh HaKadoshim, it's again flat. Why? For a different reason. Not because there's no aliyah, because the aliyah is so great, as we said before, that it's beyond comparison at all. So what is it? You reach a level that you're not even going up. You're completely bottled b'mtzias. Kule b'shav, it's all the same. When is all the same? When you reach that high level of feeling so close to Hashem that your entity your own personal entity doesn't count, that's what it is. And this is what happens when you come. That's what the Rambam there, he says, Eila, Eila, and here you just all straight, because this is not something that your Eila is a darge. If you go to a darge, you're still a Metzias, but you have a higher darge. You're always Metzias. This idea that you're able to go such a level that you become completely bottled to Hashem, it's not just going higher, completely bottled, is connected to what it says, also the Migdash, make for me a Migdash, v'shachanti b'seichom. Pasuk says, I will rest amongst them. Now, what does that mean? With the B'china for Kedesh HaKadoshim was in the Migdash HaProte for Yadiriden. The Eibush is saying, when you make a Migdash, I will rest not in the Migdash, for sure. I will rest in them, in every Yid, because every Yid has personal Beis HaMikdash, which is, and in Beis HaMikdash, personal Kedesh HaKadoshim, which is Pnimi the Pnimis Halev. It's the depth and the depth of the heart, which is called Yechidah Shebanefesh, was in Imiz Nitok and Tzir Vagbolen. That there is no limitations and no way to describe the Etzem HaNefesh, which is the Kedesh HaKadoshim that's in every single person. So why is it that when you come to the Kedesh HaKadoshim, there's no aliyah? You're not going up. You're mevatel yourself, because every Yid has in himself that level of the Yechidah Shebanefesh, which has no tzir and nagbol, no limitations, no description. Certainly, there's nothing that spreads out into a certain space, because it's beyond space. Was his nirmis in Yud. When you go to that high level, there's a high level, which we're saying the letters of Shem, David's name, Shem Havaya, Yud Kei Vav Kei. Each letter represents a different sphere, and it depends according to the shape of the letter. There's a Yud. The Yud is the smallest. So Yud is only a dot. That means it's a very high level, which the space is very little. Then there's a level on top of the Yud. There's a kaitz. There's a edge which sticks out, which that says Chassidut represents even a higher level, which is even less than the Yud, higher than the Yud. What we're talking about here is a level of the Yechidah Shebanefesh, which was even higher, not only from the Yud, from the kates, that little point of the Yud. What's Misadir is a Yid. If you feel you have that level, a Yid feels is mevatel u'mesalek es atzmi retzeinya lebot leil mizbarach. This is a loshon. He says from the Kutei Torah, a Yid is mevatel himself and removes himself and his will to become bottled to the Eibishter. And in them is the Etzem Eiskashus from Yidden. That's the essential connection of a Yid to the Eibishter. But his hecher forgetter v'tziyur, that's higher than any limitations and any description, higher than that, all these details. Yechidah lo yardach, it's the Yechidah that a Yid has, because we know a Yid has his neshama, nefesh, ruach, neshama, chaya, Yechidah, and Yechidah is the highest level, and that level is a level of the etzem hanefesh. It's beyond all the limitations. The dugmas that fits to the Kedesh HaKadoshim, just like Knisas Kein Godel al Shliach from Kolam Chmeis Yisrael b'chol mokim shehem achas b'shon l'Kedesh HaKadoshim. The Kein Godel would go in once a year to represent all the Kedesh HaKadoshim. That represented the Yechidah Shebanefesh. So every Yid has that Yechidah Shebanefesh, and because of that, he's able to. There's a concept of looking at it in the physical Beis Hamikdash, that going to the Kedesh HaKadoshim is that level that corresponds to the Yechidah Shebanefesh, and therefore there were no steps there. That's beyond space. It's so beyond that you can't even make it higher, because anything you'll do will be wrong, because it's not, you make 10 steps higher, 50 steps higher. It's much more than that. So what do? You don't make any steps. So just flat meaning you're completely bottled to Hashem. That's in every Yid's neshama, and that was also in the physical Kedesh HaKadoshim.